Hello everybody and welcome to another of our webinars funded by Safe Deposits Scotland Charitable Trust. Do you know, I think I've lost count of how many we've done. But I do know that next week my colleague John is taking over again, and he's going to be doing 2 webinars coming up on the more technical subjects of the roof and the structure of tenements, looking particularly at older tenements. But today, this webinar is going to be about factoring and about common insurance. And I've got 2 very brave speakers who have put themselves in the firing line to take your questions. And we'll be doing the normal thing of playing a video that we recorded of them speaking earlier on. And then after about 40 minutes, we will jump into the Q&A. So please, add your questions in the Q&A, and we're all looking forward to seeing them and answering them. Don't forget to go on the chat and say hi to us. Let us know you're there and who you are, and let us know if you've got any particular technical problems. And there's a handout, quite a short handout this week, because it just takes you to 1 page on Under One Roof, and that page will take you to every other topic that we are going to be covering today. So just before we go to the recording that Petra will set up at any moment, as she normally does, our wonderful Petra behind the scenes who handles all the technical issues, we have been getting to grips with the CPD issue, and Petra is going to put a message, a sticky message at the top of the page, and follow that through. And if you have any difficulties, just hang in there. We will be getting back to everybody to make sure that if you want a CPD because you are a letting agent, that you will get one. So, Petra, would you just like to get the video queued up? And
today,
we will go.
Everybody, we're going to be talking about issues about common insurance and factoring. And I have got 2 very, very good guests with me, both of whom have been in this kind of business for quite some time. I've got David Reed, who is a factor with James Gibb Property Management. And I've got Chris Gavwinder of Deacon Insurance. And Chris is Deacon's representative in Scotland. So he turns up at quite a lot of owners association meetings. He'll be used to talking about all these kind of topics that we're going to be talking about just now. So common insurance is something that both you, David, and Chris, you both deal with this from different aspects, don't you? Do you both tend to liaise with each other at times over things? I mean, what's the relationship between a factor and a broker?
Are you happy for me to pick this one up, Chris, to begin with? Yeah. So the relationship, and it is an education process for homeowners and developers alike to understand exactly what that relationship is. And what tends to happen is we have numerous developments, numerous properties involved in that, quite a huge portfolio, and we'll go to different brokers and we'll speak to them about delivery of service level agreements, what they give us in terms of a product, not for us, but what they give the homeowners in terms of a product. They will then, depending on the broker that you choose, will go away and do a lot of diligence in the marketplace, right across the UK, whether it's London markets, whether it's the UK market, and support the factor throughout that process as well, because in factoring we aren't likely to be 100% experts in insurance. So it's similar to roofs, it's similar to landscaping, it's similar to fire maintenance. You rely upon the specialist to guide and keep you right as you go. So when we identify which broker almost ticks those boxes for us, and as I said, not just for us, but for what we think our homeowner wants to see as a product there, we'll spend a bit of time with the broker looking at the marketplace. Expect that, certainly Deacons have in the past for ourselves went out to 9 different insurance companies with the portfolios in an attempt to find the keenest price. And every insurance company will look at a development and they'll analyse the claims that have been made in that development, and they'll backdate it 3 to 5 years. And if it, in the current, especially the blocks of flats, the biggest claim ratio is to do with escape of water. It's been worse since the turn of the millennium, when everything moved from copper piping to plastic piping. So you find that there's much more leaks through at the back end of the construction. And as I always say to homeowners, when you look at a premium, and if the claims ratio is 115%, that means that the insurance company has paid out 15% more than the actual premium that they've brought in. So ultimately, they're running at a loss.
Chris, how much a difference does the claims experience make to the amount of premium that somebody would end up paying?
Yeah, I think that's one of the factors, Annie. When an insurer goes to look at pricing a risk for a block of flats, what they tend to take into consideration, what's the construction type of the block? You know, is it standard construction? Is it modern construction? Is it listed? So that's one of the impact. The other impact will tend to be the postcode. Is it near a flood zone, etc.? But probably the one that has the biggest impact, as David alluded to, was what we call the loss ratio. And the loss ratio, really, it's a measure of the claims paid out expressed as a percentage of the premium received by the insurer.
What can factors do to help owners keep their insurance premiums down then, Chris?
Well, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. What the insurers will tend to use as a basic risk management tool that they have available are excesses. Obviously, you know, the higher the excess will be, specifically maybe on escape of water damage, that will have a positive impact effectively on the premium. About 70% of all losses we have are escape of water. So the less the insurer is going to pay out on claims, the better the risk for the insurer, the better the premium. And I think from a price perspective, it's better for the homeowner as well.
One of the things that owners are often given a choice about is whether to go for a low premium and a high excess, or a high excess and a low premium. There must be a sweet spot somewhere between the amount of excess that you're going to pay on any policy and the actual premium.
So I don't think now there is an effectively sweet spot per se. Excess is always something which the insurer would negotiate. But at the moment now, a lot of these excess are being imposed by insurers as a matter of contract because of the historic escape of water losses. What we're finding from an insurance perspective now, a development with a good loss ratio, you're looking at escape of water between £300 and £500 is becoming more and more now of a standard issue, primarily because there has been so much exposure to that particular risk.
David, what do you do to help owners to keep their premiums down? There must be a whole range of things that you do, aren't there?
We have a development in Glasgow, down near the river, where they had continuous plumbing issues. We've spent a lot of time working with the broker to identify via their risk assessors what we could do, and we come out with a water guard. So that water guard system is almost like an immediate indication that there's water pressure released from the system, which basically would avoid a few drips on the floor versus 2 or 3 flats being flooded out. So again, what that will do is reduce the number of claims from the water damage and ultimately bring down the claims experience, which will flow from what we talk about. Gutter cleans is a major one, you know, downpipe, not just gutter cleans, but downpipe and gutter cleans, because the amount of damage that can be done to the fabric of a building by them, you know, the downpipe backing up and the gutters overflowing is quite significant.
I've been aware of owners saying to me on this question of gutters being cleaned and rot building up, well, it's okay, look, we'll just claim on the insurance if something goes wrong. Can they do
that? That is a classic one for us. And using a live example, a homeowner who had water ingressing, and the insurance company sent out a loss adjuster. The loss adjusters turned up, looked at the damage to the property, went a stage further, went to roof level, identified the roof was 35 years old with zero maintenance in the 35 years, and basically repudiated, knocked back the claim on the basis of the fact that it didn't fit a cause, an insured peril, because it was poor maintenance and wear and tear, and that is situations that we find ourselves in on a regular basis. When you're
Is there a way that owners can kind of reduce their premiums by demonstrating that they do carry out good maintenance practices?
I think if what the insurers want, they want to insure a building which has been looked after, it's in good condition, and isn't going to be causing too many claims moving forward. You will identify a particular building where you have these issues, and that's where we will talk to the factor. There is a particular recurring incident in this particular development. Is there anything that we can do collectively to try and stem the issue? And then that will be taken up with the managing agent, with a factor, when they go around to do the site reviews. And it's something which I would imagine a lot of the factors will take up at committee meetings, at AGMs, etc., to try and keep the integrity of the building to its best possible advantage.
Development, and I'll open every AGM with the same statement. We are here to manage the development on behalf of homeowners, and if we work together and we can communicate and exchange the information, we will provide you information to make an informed choice. And if that information is your insurance premium is high because your claims experience is high, and here is the things that you can do to see that reduce.
I have a number of people who've come to me and said, why is my property valued differently to that of another tenement up the street that looks just the same? Because it's making a huge difference on my premium. Why does this happen? Because
what we recommend, and the factors will agree here, is that developments should be surveyed at least every 3 to 5 years, 3 years minimum, to make sure that, you know, we're covering the risk, we're indemnifying the risk to its full extent. We are given through a RIC surveyor, that is the declared value of that development, and that's what we use for the declared value. So it is very hard. We can only act on the instructions that we've been given. The surveyors will probably may use different models to determine the particular value of the property. What is the footprint of the property? What is the communal area?
Can people come back with a second valuation?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would strongly recommend to the owners, as I'm sure the factor would do, if you're not happy with the valuation, challenge the surveyor.
The second sort of big question that we get all the time is about the commissions that factors get on insurance. Could you just explain what that commission is, why you get it, David, and just how much of a difference it makes to people? It's
a perception and education to homeowners of this commission, because that commission owners seem to think comes off of their premium that they pay. It isn't the case. What happens is the factor, just like a homeowner could go to an insurance broker and say, right, I have X amount of properties, I will give you all my business. What commission do you take from the insurance company for going to them as a broker? And they will say 10%, and we'll say, well, if you want our business, we want 5%. And then, so basically the broker is paying out, it's coming out of the broker's commission, not coming out the homeowner's funds, if you like. The other point is, why would the factor want to take the commission, and what do they do for it? And I can only answer for our organisation, and I'm going way back to when I first started up our organisation at the time, and I recognised that in order to manage those claims as they come through and capture that diligence and work with the broker and work with the insurer and have these liaison, I found that the management fee that we were charging at the time did not cover any of that. So, and there has been conversations in the past from different factors who have said, we don't charge commission, but actually the management fee is double that of the rest of the industry. So they're actually saying, well, waste development.
So effectively, if you are charging commission, then the work that's attributable to insurance is paid by those who pay the insurance. and those who don't have insurance with you aren't paying for that kind of work.
Correct.
Okay, so Chris, I suppose the question to you is: if owners came to you directly, Chris, would they end up paying exactly the same premium as they would pay if they went through a factor?
I think from a cost perspective, I don't think there'd be all that much in it, but I think what the owners have to take into consideration as well, yes, there is the cost, but please remember the other sort of situation which we've touched on at the moment. First and foremost, it's the collection of the premiums. Who's going to facilitate and organise the collection of the premiums for a block or a number of blocks? The second one, what a lot of the managing agents do is they will arrange with finance companies interest-free credit. So again, there's that sort of situation to look at. But possibly more importantly, it's all the decisions regarding, are we insuring for the right value? More, there's an awful lot behind the scene which the managing agent is effectively doing. There's absolutely nothing stopping owners to maybe look at insuring the policies, the buildings themselves, but it will be a challenge. It's almost like a full-time job. We've spoken about issue. So yes, the homeowner could go to the insurance broker directly. There might be a small saving there, but you have those host of issues now and the host of issues moving forward, especially now in the insurance market. We're in what we call a hard market. There are less insurers now with appetite for these sort of risks. You have the issue with cladding, etc., etc. So again, part and parcel of the job of the managing agent is to work with a broker and an insurer to make sure that we're getting access to as many markets as we possibly can to provide the best cover at hopefully the most competitive price. So it's an ongoing sort of situation, and it's a full-time job.
Okay, thanks.
There is actually a live example that's actually happened within the last couple of hours today, one that I was involved in before I came on, and it's a residents association and committee who approached their own broker, and I think they've been with that broker for 2 years, but in the past 2 years the claims history has increased, as has the hardening of the marketplace, and they approached us and said, could we put it through our broker, which we did, and managed to genuinely get a keener price. However, the biggest part of that was that the current broker wasn't prepared to sign the financial agreements so that it could pay, so because the insurer was looking for the £50,000 up front, and the owners didn't have it, and the insurer wasn't likely to insure without it. The broker wasn't putting it in place, so obviously they turned to us, and not only did we get a keener price, but we have all those, as Chris aligned to there, we have all those financial models in place to be able to pay it, to have owners build on a quarterly basis, paying it monthly rather than having to pay a premium of £1,000 up front on an annual basis. That is again the plus side of the size of the portfolios.
I get a lot of owners who come to me and say, why am I going to bother with a common block insurance? It's far cheaper if I go on various websites. I go and compare the markets. How can these websites offer these policies so much more cheaply?
I think predominantly they're designed for residential accommodation, detached, semi-detached, which they find. Block of flats is, I think, a completely different kettle of fish. What are the excesses they're charging? What are the coveraging they're charging? There is probably a need for it somewhere, but I think it's the service and support and backup that you'd effectively get. And as David alluded to as well, is the financing of it. How's it going to be paid? Are they insuring for public liability in communal areas, internal and external?
And we had a development in the city centre of Edinburgh that had individual insurance policies until a car came down the road and went straight into a boundary wall and a block, which then meant basically had a Harris fence put round it. The block was uninhabitable for the best part of, I think it was 6 months, maybe more, until the owners got together between 80 different insurance companies well, first of all, the owners had to stump up their share to repair all that. Then, once they had stumped up their share, they had to individually go to their own insurance companies. Then you have a situation where there's someone in there who doesn't actually have an insurance policy in place for the block of flats as well. So that is a missing share right away. And if that had been a fire, then they would still be sitting there waiting for someone to fill that gap for that sum of money to be able to rebuild it. So my concern is, again, with these insurance brokers or companies that don't specialise in flatted developments, is that they tend to not consider the communal roof, the communal stairwell, the communal fire system, the landscaping to the rear. Then there's the public liability and indemnity insurance that's attached to the policy. What does that cover? Does that just cover the threshold and inside the flat? Or does it consider the stairwell, someone moving up and down the stairwell out in the backyard? And the point behind the communal buildings insurance policies and the brokers and insurers that specialise in it is the fact is how comprehensive that is. How much it covers you for. Some of the block policies we have actually is a communal contents insurance. I've seen that in other developments where the carpet and the common stair has been damaged by either fire or staining, accidental damage, but it's never replaced because 6 properties all have individual insurance and they've never got together to replace it and they don't want to pay for it. Whereas under a standard block insurance policy, there would be a contents insurance attached to that as well, so you could get the carpet replaced under accidental damage or malicious damage claim. That you have an insurance block policy in place for all blocks of flats. And I would highly, highly recommend it after experiencing that.
It's difficult enough for one insurer, one broker to manage a major loss. It's very, very difficult if you've got umpteen different policies involved.
Look, I think we've covered the insurance thing. So what I suggest, Chris, we can probably let you go and say thank you.
Okay, guys. Nice to speak to you.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you again at the Q&A in the webinar.
Good. Okay, guys. See you later, David. See you later, Annie. Cheers now. Bye.
Since Chris has left us, David and I are now just going to talk about some of the issues which are specific to factoring. David, factors and owners, do factors have more powers than owners to get things carried out, repairs particularly?
Again, I see this as an education for many people. It's not just homeowners. I deal with solicitors on a regular basis, and some people just don't even understand factoring at times. The role of the factor is to manage the development on behalf of the homeowners. So our remit, like with the homeowners, is all linked to the development deed of conditions. So when someone buys a property, they'll go through the title deed for the actual property, the flat that they live in. But they'll also, or the solicitor should discuss with them the deed of conditions, which is aligned to that, which identifies if there's common areas and the homeowners within Scotland under the freehold tenure will have responsibilities for the common areas and have a share in that common area. What the deed of conditions does highlight is what those responsibilities are for the homeowner, but if there's been a factor appointed, what the factor's responsibility.
I mean, one of the things that happens is that a factor is actually the owner's agent, aren't they? So you can't do anything that owners can't do themselves, can you?
The duty holders are the co-proprietors collectively for a block of flats. And under Scottish tenure, it's not like down south where the leasehold is driven by an individual who maybe owns the curtilage of the block. In Scotland, it's collectively the homeowners within that block, and they are the responsible party duty holders to make sure that maintenance is carried out on a regular basis. Anyone entering and leaving that block of flats is safe, because if there's any maintenance issues that hasn't been carried out because the factor has said, has written out to all the homeowners and said you have to carry out this work because X, Y and Z will happen if you don't, and those owners say no, we're not going to pay for that, then there is no funds available for that to be paid for. That moves us on to, again, the understanding by homeowners of what the float is. And the float is a refundable deposit, but the float will, so when you're talking about floats, the float level should cover a minimum of 6 months worth of costs. The reason why it's a float is put in place is because most of the development deed of conditions will say a development is billed in arrears. So we utilise the float for the 3 to 6 month period, which pays for the services, the cleaning, the ground maintenance, the buildings insurance. And then when we bill it out, we'll top that float up. So it'll go backwards and forwards until such time as someone sells the property. And when they sell the property and they've paid their service charges up to date, they would get that float back on. However, you can imagine that if we decide to do an external redecoration and that float has not been put at a level to cover that, then that's an additional bill that homeowners would have to pay in advance before that work is carried out.
So owners have always been told, look, never pay a tradesman in advance, because that way you've got no control over the quality. You can't withhold money if the tradesman does a bad job. But here you are, David, saying, give us the money up front. So what are you going to do to make sure owners get a decent job from those contractors?
Having a surveyor stroke project manager in place for those large scale works who's independent, who will write the specification of works, who will then go out and tender it to different contractors. Even if it's a contractor of homeowner's choice, it means they're all quoting apples for apples. Then towards the end of that, the surveyor will then look to sign off those works and say, yes, that has actually been done as per the specification. The factor will not and cannot release those funds until such time as we've had that type of sign off, either by a group of homeowners or by a project manager or an independent surveyor involved.
Is that practice the same for even the sort of the reactive repairs, you know, that wee bit of storm damage and things like that?
No. What you have there is you know, any organisation, whether it's a factor or other, is only as good as the stakeholding partnerships it has. So in order for a supplier to get on our books, they have to go through a very stringent preferred contractor onboarding. So we will check everything from their public liability insurance. We will check their health and safety policies to make sure.
But once a repair's been carried out, will you actually send somebody out to go and check that repair?
No, I always say this. I mean, people say, but your property, your development manager should come out and have a look. Well, if that was a roof repair and you've already paid for an access platform to be carried out, you know, the development manager is not going to go on a cherry picker and go to roof level and turn up and charge you another bill for a cherry picker. There's things that we can do if owners remain concerned about the standard of that work, which is why I always say that it will either be one or the other. It will be an insurance claim when it comes to a roof, or it will be improvement work. So if you get a surveyor involved or a project manager, that will tick the wear and tear and maintenance box. And if it's an insurance work, then you ask for a loss adjuster to be appointed, and that loss adjuster will check the insurance work. And there's things that they can do now where you can actually send up a drone and actually carry out photographic evidence at a cheap cost now. Can't expect the development managers and property managers to be out on site every time cleaning works has been carried out, gardening works has been carried out, a minor repair to a door is carried out. It will all be on the basis of how the suppliers are onboarded with the factor in the first place, whether they've got service level agreements in place. You can ask to see them. Whether obviously there'll be preferred rates that's been agreed as well for minor jobs and minor joinery. Again, you know, there's regulation under the Property Factors Act now where factors have to make sure that they can evidence that they've done the right thing. So, but specifically when it comes to larger scale works, I re-emphasise, you always want to ask, it might be an extra £1,000 on top of a £5,000 or £6,000 repair, but that extra £1,000 for a project manager and an independent surveyor is worth it, and we now recommend it. And if owners say no, they don't want to pay that extra money, then we'll say that we can't be held. We're not project managers, we're not surveyors. Everybody expects a factor to be able to be a landscaper, a joiner, a cleaner, a solicitor, an accountant. We can't be all of those, so we have to call in that specialist advice and specialist help. And that's what I would say to even owners that self-manage, is that make sure that you get that independent voice in there.
One question, I suppose that leads to, David, is about training for factors, isn't it? People keep saying, why aren't factors trained? Why isn't there a professional qualification?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Again, it's down to the first answer is an industry, and I've said it before that I have a different hat here as well, which is President of the Property Managers Association Scotland, and we've been heavily involved in making sure that we have a curriculum that's by Scotland and for Scotland, and the IRPM qualification, which has been around for some amount of years, but very much based on an English tenure, has now been adapted to suit the Scottish tenure. At the time, having been a business owner, I would have been reluctant to put people through the process of training and education that doesn't suit this country's property management industry, but I certainly would now. But over the years, while others were choosing to put people through that training course, what we were doing was spending a lot of time with those stakeholder partnerships. We were bringing in suppliers, roofing suppliers who are training up. We were bringing in health and safety who are carrying out training sessions. And I always use, as an example, our business development director, who started as a receptionist 14 years ago, but she showed a willingness, she showed an understanding. I think she's now a surveyor, qualified surveyor as well. We put her through that training course. So yeah, we will not say that we're qualified in every single service that we deliver, and if we're not, we will always find someone that we trust who is. But
there is this paper qualification coming through from it. IRPM is the Institute of Residential Property Managers, isn't it?
Yes.
And you think within 2 or 3 years, owners would be able to go up to their factors and say, how many staff do you have who've gone through this?
Absolutely, and that curriculum, having been involved in the development of that, is excellent, and I would have no hesitation. I would really like to see under the Property Factors Act that type of qualification becoming a standard.
We do get those questions of people who say that their factors ought to be pursuing the owners who aren't paying their bills, and they get very annoyed if you don't.
So anyone that doesn't pay their bill thinks they're hitting the factor in the pocket, and that's the biggest misconception, is that they're actually hitting themselves in the pocket because they're leaving insufficient funds to continue to supply the services to sustain the property values. Mm-hmm. So as per our written statement of services, we will go and actively pursue an individual, and someone may see a cost come through for £10 per property, which is actually the cost of the solicitor's fees for pursuing that individual. Using again a case study, we did a site in Dunfermline, and the owners got a bill for £7 for legal costs, and they weren't happy. But what we managed to evidence, had we not pursued that, they would have got a bill for £148 of irrecoverable service charges because the people weren't paying. So people need to understand that the factors, by not paying their bill, they're hitting the factor in the pocket. What they're doing is they're hitting their neighbours in the pocket, the people who are paying the bills, to make sure the services are maintained. And the last point I would make is there's a live example in Glasgow city centre of a development that weren't paying their factoring bills by majority, they don't have a factor. I still speak to the residents, the chairman of the residents committee to this day, who bought his property for £360,000 a penthouse, and he can't get it on the market for £160,000. So if you want evidence of what happens if you're not properly factoring a development, there's your reduced property value. Yes, that's an extreme, but it's an actual live example.
The other question that people come to us with sometimes, David, is when we say, look, have an owners association, get together, get some leadership, and they come back and say, well, factors don't like owners associations. It's something that we recommend owners have. What do you think about that?
We would encourage every single property manager to carry out an AGM, make sure you try and get an association and committee in place, because that association and committee, once they understand following presentations like this, fully understand the factors remit and their responsibilities, the challenges, the barriers, everything we've talked about today, these committees then start to, as soon as that information has been shared, they start to understand and start to work closer with the factor and actually become an extension of the factor's eyes and ears. And I always say it to our development managers, when you walk around a site, you have one set of eyes and one set of ears. However, if you use those ears and go and speak to the owners, they'll tell you what is frustrating them, what is irritating them in their site. So it would be remiss of any organisation not to encourage an association and committee. However, and this is the however, we find apathy by homeowners as being our biggest challenge and barrier. So, and it's such a shame, because our best run developments are developments with active associations and committees in place.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you. I think if we go back to that original question I asked you about factors being an owner's agent, a factor is only ever as good as the clients that they have.
100%.
The better owners are as clients, the more educated, the less apathetic, the more they're going to get out of their factor, aren't they?
Yeah, so many. I always use an example of a development in Bearsden. It's the one development that I still manage to this day, and I refuse. I've been asked several times to let it go, and I won't let it go, because I took it off another property management company in 2006, and the best description I can give is it suffered from supervise neglect. The valuations were down because it needed soffits and fascias fixed, downpipes fixed. The gardeners weren't supervised correctly, and by working with the committee and the association and having a proactive factor, you can actually, as I always say, the values, people who do not believe that a properly maintained communal area doesn't add value to a development is so wrong, it is untrue.
Good note to finish on, David. Oh, thank you very much for that, and we will get a lot more questions in a Q&A, I think.
Yeah, no, I welcome them, because as I touched on it earlier on, I've been on that side. That's what drove me to set up a factoring company all those years ago, was because I believed that there was something different that could happen out there. So I actually always put myself into the homeowner's shoes, because I've been there. I think we're having some IT issues, Chris. Okay, I apologise, everyone. What appears to have happened here is we seem to have lost the host. So I'm just going to pick up on some of the questions that come through while we're obviously waiting. Picked up on the scenario, the question that was asked about having a communal policy being more expensive than individual policies. And one of the answers I would give to that from experience and knowledge is threefold. One is the valuation that is being provided to the insurer that I touched on earlier on does not have significant experience in communal block insurance. And two, does it include the common areas and what would happen if there'd been a common area claim? And third, you have to make sure that the claims experience is relevant to the whole block, including all the common areas. And that would see a significant difference between an individual policy and a policy for a block of flats. And you would only find that out in the event of a partial or substantial loss. Sorry, Annie, I just kicked into action there.
I'm very glad you did, David. I seem to have had a few technical problems there trying to get in on this. So hopefully...
We've lost Annie. So Chris, just come in.
Well, you've gone, David.
All right, are you back now?
That's you back, yeah.
Yeah, just coming in off the back of that as obviously an independent insurance broker. I mean, that's a fair point to have made in terms of the three things that I said were relevant to the variation between an individual policy and a communal policy.
I think that tends to be the main challenge. I think what you have to take into consideration as well is if you have a block from an insurance perspective, insurers will class that as a commercial risk, and primarily because you have communal areas, internal and external, communal areas where people can access in and out. So the whole risk dynamic is different to a semi-detached or a detached property. You have a whole host of people within the block, and that does impact on the rates, on the risk. And comparing the two is very difficult.
Okay.
Yes. There were quite a few questions about individual and common policies, weren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, cost is a big question for people in this, but I always had this big concern about what's going to happen if there is a fire or something tragic like that. And, we have dealt with 2 or 3 cases where people have come to us saying how much difficulty they have in trying to get insurers coordinated. And I do wonder, what's the role of the loss adjuster in these cases? Can they help people bring various insurance companies together?
What the loss adjuster does really, Annie, is they would be the insurer's eyes and ears in respect of a large claim. If we have a large claim on a development, let's say over £5,000-6,000, what the insurer will want will be a loss adjuster to go in and look at the claim, what's happened, what's the cause of the claim, and then what they will do, they report and feed that back into the insurers with their view as to what the cause of the damage was. Is it an insured peril, and is it something that the insurers should be paying out on? So really, they're the eyes and ears of the insurers assessing a claim and a loss at a block.
So they can't actually do anything to help bring different insurance companies together in the event?
They will normally act on behalf of an insurer. So if you have a block policy with one insurer, that insurer will instruct the loss adjuster to go out and investigate the cause, report that back. The challenge could be then, if you have maybe 2 or 3 different policies, you might have 2 or 3 different loss adjusters coming back and reporting the situation. But the loss adjuster, in essence, reports back to the insurer.
Right, okay, thanks for that. Were there any other points coming up there about the individual and common insurance policies, apart from the cost and the cost difference, which I think you covered?
There was a point, I think someone had asked whether or not you could arrange a common policy when they're all separated by individual policies. We have actually had experience of that in the past, and it was actually a development I referred to that had the damage done to the boundary wall and block. But because their deed of conditions was silent on block insurance policies, they had to get together to get a meeting held and a ballot held and to get 100% commitment. Whereas if you have a block of flats where it does say a communal policy in the deed of condition and they're individual policies, then you can do that by a majority.
Yeah. I think most of the other questions we have here are now about factoring. But if people do have other questions about common insurance, pop them in and we will come back to them. A couple of the questions, David, are actually about floats and the kind of variety of levels that floats tend to be set at. Do you have any particular comment on that?
Yeah, what I would say is that when we tender a development, what we would do is go out to the development, have a look at it, look at all the associated costs in terms of what the core services are that are required to maintain that block. We would look at the annual cost, and then we would decide in consultation with homeowners as to what the period of billing would be. So if we decided that we were going to bill on a quarterly basis or a 6-monthly basis, we would make sure that the float, because it's been billed in arrears, covers at least that 3-month or 6-month period of the annual cost. So that is why you'll see a variation. Someone living in an open space, which is landscaping only and play park maintenance, would be paying somewhere in the region of £50 to £100 to £150, depending on the numbers of properties involved. Whereas in blocks of flats, you will always see the core services for a quarter. Can it range, depending on how technically built it is, from tenements at £300 for a quarter or £150 for a quarter, where you would base the float almost as enough to cover that cost, because what you've got to remember is you're billing in arrears. So when you use that float, you've got to make sure it covers all the service charge costs for that period. And when you bill it out, it tops that float up. So it's always got to be at the level of that quarterly cost, that 6-monthly cost, or that annual cost.
So really the float levels are set according to the amount of repair that you're anticipating or has been done in the past then?
Yeah, so it would include, it would include buildings insurance, fire, maintenance, landscaping, cleaning. That actually answers a second question, because someone asked the question about improvement works versus maintenance. And the best way when we're training our own staff is we say the core services are all the regular maintenance items. Anything other than that, a roof repair of a large scale, I'm not talking about minor door closer repairs or lock repairs, I'm talking about substantial works. The float can't cover that sum of money, so you would then bill in advance. The factor would collect the sums, they would sit it in a trust account. They wouldn't They wouldn't give it to the contractor until the work's been instructed and the work's been carried out satisfactory, and then at that point the factor would release the funds. But there is a clear demarcation between what is core services and what is improvement work.
Yeah, yeah. And there is also the definition of improvement work as well as putting in something that isn't there at the moment too, which is almost a third category of things, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be, we build 10-year maintenance programs to 20-year maintenance programs around about blocks. So in there would be external redecoration, tree surveys, boundary wall surveys, boundary wall repairs. That is the type of cost in addition to the core services.
Okay. Right. Moving on to something else. And this is a question that does come up. And it's about whether a factor can tell other owners who the non-payers are. What's your rule, David?
Our rule is a very simple one that's been taken from legal advice, and that is from a data protection point of view. While we are pursuing an individual, we would not disclose who that person is to the rest of the homeowners. However, once it gets into the courtroom and the papers are put on the notice board within a courtroom, then it becomes an issue of public knowledge, and at that point we can release that data. But for obvious reasons, and there is many reasons that are obvious, you wouldn't be. I've seen other property management companies name and shame, and if you get that wrong, there's data protection. There's all sorts of issues that will happen organisationally and as a group of homeowners. It's not just about protecting the factors; it's about protecting the homeowners, and I don't mean the ones who are not paying.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got someone suggesting that perhaps a way round this is to name those who have paid, but
yes.
that is effectively saying who hasn't paid, really, isn't it? And taking yourself to that issue. Douglas, I wonder if the issue that you've actually got is that you're concerned that your factor isn't following up these debts, and maybe what you should be doing is checking with your factor exactly what they are doing to chase owners. I mean, as I said, and I put that question to David earlier on, owners don't like other owners to lead debts. They do want to know the factor is doing something. So perhaps the question is to go back to your factor and ask them what they are doing to chase those particular owners, and then to expect maybe that there could be some legal fee that comes in on your factoring bill, and hopefully you'll be happy to pay it on the basis that your factor will get it back for you. Does that sound like the way to deal with things to you, David?
Yeah, for sure. You almost look at a development as a mini business because it has funds in there to be able to run that development. And ultimately, as a business, you would find yourself with potentially income being less than the expenditure because someone's not paying. So you would have a decision to either pursue that individual or not, or write it off as a bad debt. It is the exact same scenario. So what we do as an organisation is that we actively pursue it, and under those core service charge costs, we have a budget in there for potentially pursuing individuals, not on our behalf, but on behalf of the paying co-proprietors. And that model and formula works very, very well.
Thanks. The next question is one from somebody who we were corresponding earlier on. He says a number of his properties are unfactored, but he's asking whether factors would ever take on a block where one individual is just completely opposed to having a factor.
Is that a question for me? Is it for me?
I think that's you, David.
Yeah, the answer, I would be very uncomfortable with that because we don't know whether that other property is sitting uninsured. I would imagine Chris can probably help me out here that the insurers would be very uneasy with that because there's an exposure there for everyone involved. I think as a business decision we would look for all or nothing.
Yeah.
Yes, Chris, please come in on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of situation there. It's what the insurers are worried about are the gap in covers in a particular block. And I think that stems back to the original point, Annie, about, you know, insuring individually or collectively as a block of flats.
Yeah. I mean, I think in theory, taking on a factor is a management decision, and that is a majority decision. And I think what you need to do, John, is maybe go round to that owner and say, look, it's a majority decision, and we're going to find a way to hold you to this. And if necessary, you just need to maybe just start charging that owner for the work that you do in maintaining the property, and just start to bring them round to the idea that, you know, good factoring is going to save their property in the long run. And perhaps also, you know, one of the things we were talking about when we talked about mediation is just try and understand what that owner's perspective is, why it is they are implacably opposed to a factor. And if it's because they think a factor is not going to add anything to the service that they get, then maybe you just need to try and convince them that not all factors are as they were in the past. You know, the practices David were talking about were considerably different to those of the way many factors worked it in the past. Do you want to come back on that, David?
Yeah, 100%. It's dramatically changed. I mean, we've had the conversation, Annie, where I, working in NHS and commercial, had a flat in the West End of Glasgow. So back then it was very different. Fast forward now, you find that there's regulation in place, the Property Factors Act Code of Conduct, which the Property Managers Association Scotland was involved in, amongst other stakeholders and bodies that all wanted to see that industry regulated because of the reputation it had by a selected few who were not very fair and reasonable and rational factors. We're now at a position where if you step out of turn, you fall foul of an Act of Parliament. An enforcement order can be put against you. You can, as we've already seen now, that one or two factors have now been struck off and can no longer operate. So it's an industry that has evolved dramatically now. Still has a reputation attached to it, but it's definitely changing, and should be recognised as changing dramatically.
Yeah. The person who asked the question about whether you take on someone who's just the individual owner who's implacably opposed to factoring came back to say his question was about factoring, not just about insurance. The two are obviously concerned. John, I hope we've answered your question there. If not, let's get back in on the Q&A or the chat with you, because we will keep coming back and trying to answer these things for you.
I do actually think I know what that question is, Annie, and I think I get the point now. And John has actually come on and said, as opposed to factoring as the block appointment of a factor, the deed of conditions will be very clear. If that person who says they're opting out has and the process to appoint a factor has been followed as per the deed of conditions, and it says in there that at a meeting, properly convened meeting, the meeting's quoted with X number of people there, that decision's taken to appoint a factor, then that individual who says that they're not recognising that can be taken to court for those costs by that factor, because there is a clear process. And in any democracy, the conditions is almost as written in such a way it creates a democracy, and it tells you what the levels of that democracy are. And if that person doesn't align to that, then they can legally be taken to court, and the outstanding factoring fees, once the factor is appointed, recovered.
Yeah, I think they obviously have to get the factor appointed first, who's willing to take on that one owner, and there will be factors who will do that. Keep looking around and talking to people, and talk about to those factors about what the rest of you owners want to do to deal with that owner as well. As David was saying earlier on, it is about owners and factors working together to try and solve these problems. So just coming around to that kind of question about owners and factors working together, we have got a question here about the collective authority that an owners association has to instruct a factor. And I think the thing behind this is that an owners association is not actually a legal entity, is it, David? It's kind of a voluntary organisation of people. It's really just a collection of individuals. And while they're still very important. They aren't a legal identity in itself. They have got to try and represent the majority of owners, haven't they? Is this something you've had to deal with?
Yeah, no, you do have that situation where the Residents Association and a committee is in place. What we always advise is that when you arrange an AGM, an annual general meeting, that when that committee is put in place, that you do exactly the same thing as you would do with a factor, and that is you agree what the element of authority is. And if that authority as a factor is that we can spend £10 per property or £1,000 or £500, whatever is the greater, that allows us to do our job and maintain and repair the development. Likewise, a committee at an AGM can have that same agreement, but it has to come back to the AGM the next time to agree it again and again and again. What I would say is that there has been that's evolved now as well, with a lot of new build developments put in place what's classified as a development management scheme, where it's a community investment company. It's set up, but you need directors. Yet again, if you get apathy, it doesn't really operate that well. So either way, the best run developments will always come back to an association working together with a factor, and then you will genuinely get the best result out of that as a development.
Yeah, thanks, David. And Patton, if you want to come back on that at all, please just pop back in on the Q&A. We've now got a question from someone who's they're a landlord in a block which is factored, but most of the other properties in that block are rented. And she's asking whether the factor should check the building and tell the owners what needs done, because her current factor doesn't do that. And it seems when they visit, they just don't seem to see that, check the cleaning and the gardening and things like that. This sounds like not quite the kind of level of service that you offer, David. What should Liz do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, if you would, as a minimum, expect the property manager who has put the service level agreements and contractors in place to do some sort of quality control measurement on that, whether it's once a month, once a quarter, or once every 6 months, because all factors vary. Or for that matter, the contract set up with the homeowners vary. If you remain dissatisfied with the services that are being supplied or not supplied, as the case may be from what I've just heard, then photograph it, write into the property manager, highlighting the fact that you have the evidence, but make sure you've got evidence there that is the case. Send it into the factor. If they don't react, ask to see their complaints procedure. If they still don't react and you follow the complaints procedure, then you have the ability to take it to the housing chamber, which is a first-tier tribunal, which the housing chamber almost is linked back to that Property Factors Act and Code of Conduct, aligned to earlier on, and that is the regulation for those factors. So if the factor is not qualifying and quantifying what it is they're supplying you as a service, then you have a right of retort via channels above that factoring company, and that is exactly what I mean by the reputation. That really infuriates me, is that if you're not getting any action, you're paying for a service that you want a result from, and make sure you provide them the evidence, and if it's still not addressed, you have a course of action.
Yeah, we have a page on complaining about your factor. I always hope it's a very little used page, but it's there. Liz also had the question about whether her factor should be carrying out surveys, David.
No, not as a standard. There's a difference between a site inspection and a survey. Again, what I'll answer for our organisation. We have an inspection app that our guys use and go to site, and on there it will lead that development manager by the hand to look for gutters and cleaning and ground maintenance. Surveys of a building is a very different thing. That comes into the improvement works area. So I go along to an AGM. I'll give owners a cost for getting a building audit carried out. And the building audit is a great thing because it'll build a 10-year, 20-year, 25-year maintenance programme, but certainly not a core service, and certainly not covered under that float, and certainly not covered under your regular bill. You would have to be billed as an additional cost for that.
Okay. So should the frequency which a factor is going to visit a property be in the written statement of service, David?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I broke up slightly.
Well, if a factor it says they're going to carry out inspections, should it say in the written statement of service that they are going to do that, and how often?
Yeah, they should. They don't, that written statement of service tells every homeowner exactly what the service provision is. So they've agreed at the point when they've solidified that contract with you as a group of homeowners, and they've said, we will do X, Y, and Z. If they don't do X, Y, and Z, then you have a recourse of action under that complaints process we talked about earlier. So if we say we will be a development monthly, some other residents associations have asked us to do it quarterly, some have asked to do it 6 monthly. But if they don't specify, we would be there on a monthly basis to carry out an inspection. And a bit of it's a facilities management maintenance inspection. It is not a building survey. We're not, as I said earlier on in the before the questions and answers, we can't be a jack of all trades here. We can't be the solicitor, the accountant, the joiner, the roofer, the plumber. But we can be. We can train our guys to look for the basics of facilities management. Is the fire panel being tested regularly? Is the cleaning being carried out to the service level agreement and specifications, and that type of approach you would expect from a facilities management company?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me as if what Liz should be doing is checking the written statement of service, and if she, as an absentee owner, like it sounds like most of the people in this block are absentee owners, is go and speak to the factor and say, we want you to do these inspections. What's it going to cost? Build that into the service that we get, isn't it?
Correct.
Thanks.
And if they refuse to do it, and I've just read one of the questions there that says, we can't change factor, unfortunately, and that is obviously the biggest challenge that you have. You can change factor. It just takes a number of owners to get together who are disgruntled, but it will take a collective number of owners to physically go around and chap doors and ask the question: are you a tenant or are you the owner? If you're the tenant, can you give me the details of that landlord? Finally, you will have a ballot in your hand that says the majority of owners want to change factor. Yeah,
we've got a page about that on Under One Roof as well. So
good. Sorry.
Again, head there, everybody, for the hows and whys, but we do give advice there on what to look for in a new factor too, if that's what you are looking to do. We've got a couple of insurance questions, Chris. So we've got one here. Can you take a policy only for the communal areas of a tenement block of 10 flats where everyone holds individual policies?
Yeah, I've seen that. Is that from Sarah? Yes. I mean, it's a very, very good question. Under all block policies that we've alluded to, as a matter of course, you will get an element of public liability cover within that policy for all the internal and external communal areas. You will not necessarily get public liability on individual policies, but if you wish to take out a separate public liability policy, these are freely available on the market for the owners to look at and purchase if they haven't got it incorporated. But again, one of the main reasons of the block policy, the commercial risk, you have, third parties have access to it, and you need to cover that, and they're covered under block policies.
Can I ask a supplementary on that one, Chris? Is it possible for people to get insurance to kind of cover the situation where you've got an owner who is uninsured?
It's very difficult. What you would have to do then is, what is the value of that policy for that block? Because in the event of a total write-off, there's going to be effectively a shortfall. Should the owners consider absorbing that cost themselves, or should that be noted on the policy?
I think it's something where owners do find it very difficult to chase up their co-owners. I mean, the law. Sorry, Chris, continue.
Yeah, I think with individual policies, it is very, very difficult, and that's only going to become apparent if you have a total write-off and a major loss, and it's the gap in covers that you don't know exist until there's a major fire or a major loss or a large public liability claim, and that's why I think in most of the deed of conditions, to safeguard that, the block of policies which the managing agent can oversee and confirm that everyone is covered for the right amounts.
I mean, the law does say that you can go and ask your co-owners for evidence that they have insurance, but I think if you've got someone who refuses to cooperate, how are you going to enforce that? But I think you should have the conversation with people. You can take people to look at blocks of flats that are burnt down and have not been rebuilt.
And this harkbacks to, I think, what David was saying about how important it is to have an active committee within a block who can help with these particular sort of issues, which I do appreciate can be very difficult, within a block of flat environment.
But keep trying. We have another insurance question for you here, Chris, and it says, can the insurance valuation given by surveyors for one flat be multiplied to give the correct valuation for a whole block?
It depends on what the valuation is. I mean, I don't know what the square, you could have 2-bedroom flats, 1-bedroom flats. What is the square footage? Does the valuation take into consideration the internal and external communal areas of the development? So it's a very difficult sort of one to answer. It would be far better to get a survey for the whole development, and then with a good factor, they will be able to apportion it correctly. Okay,
so it is sort of possible, but
it'd give you an indicative value, but it may not be accurate.
And you might be underinsured. Dave, do you want to come in on this?
No, I was just confirming exactly what Chris said. He covered it off spot on. That it's you can't be certain that the valuation is absolutely correct, and you'll only find that out in the event of an eventual loss. We've done work with deacons as well, and these valuations are not as expensive as they used to be. You can actually get them done for fairly reasonable costs these days, and it's such a small price to pay to make sure that you're lying in your bed at night with a peace of mind that the property in which you're in is fully covered. But it's probably the biggest asset you have in your lifetime.
I do recall we had one owner giving us a story about how there'd been a number of fires in his block, and they'd managed to get some repair work done, but then some of the other owners just dropped out of the whole factoring agreement, and they dropped out of the insurance, and a further fire. He ended up selling his flat that he had bought for, I think, 160,000 for 10,000 in the end, and he's now living in a rented flat. So when you do talk about the relatively small sums on insurance, just think about that 150,000 loss. You're still paying for it.
And the other end of the scale there is the development in Bearsden that I was talking about, that's invested over an 11-12 year period, and now are selling properties in there for record sums. So if ever we actually had the chairman of the Residents Association actually doing testimonials for us on video, because they're obviously the other end of that horrible scenario you're talking about. So there's two extremes there, and I mean, that's an awful experience for that gentleman.
It is. I was just very sad for that person. A slightly different question here. Someone is saying that as a landlord, they take the gas issue very seriously, but when a network supplier raises an issue with the factor, should the factors advise the owners about the action they should take, or just tell the network to contact the owners individually?
This is the difference between a good factor and a bad factor, as far as I'm concerned. Legally, it is correct in what that factor has said, that it should be the utility provider that advises all the homeowners of that situation. A good factor would be the one that would coordinate all that with all the homeowners, advise them what the problem is, liaise with, become the focal point in the middle between the utility provider and the homeowners. I mean, there's no legal. It's all to do with the tenure. It's a difference between customer service and not customer service, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. A separate point coming up here is, should tenants be able to report issues directly to factors?
Yeah, again, I always run by examples. So I'll give you an example where our organisation a long time ago, when we were first starting out, took an instruction from a tenant because he had been locked out his flat to change the locks on the door. He ended up becoming a sitting tenant. So the only person that we deal with is the landlord of the property. The only person that we would bill would be the landlord of the property. How the landlord arranges that with their tenant under the lease or X, Y, and Z. Really, for all these, there's a number of other horror stories like that. We will not take instructions from tenants. What I would say is that when a factor is trying to communicate with a development about social issues, be it making sure the doors closed properly and there's security issues, then you would ask your factor to not only send it out to the landlord address, but they'll have the property address in the system. So ultimately send 2 letters when they know the property is a buy to let.
Okay. Chris, I think this may be the last one here, but it's just popped in on the chat about if you are changing from being sort of individual policies to common policy, how do you deal with the issue where all of the individual policies have different renewal dates?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, what we would do if they decide to go with a block policy, we wouldn't go with a common renewal date. We would just set it up, and as and when an existing policy finishes, we would start on a rolling renewal date. So we wouldn't have a common renewal date. It's just as and when the policy is due to start, we would bring it into the portfolio.
Okay, and that applies. We've got individual properties, just gradually come to the common insurance.
Just gradually come in once the renewal period is due. So we won't have a common renewal date to begin with. It'll just be rolling over.
That must be a nightmare of admin.
Yes, but what we could probably do is pro-rata it in 18 months for a common renewal date. So coming over initially, it could be a bit of a nuisance internally, not for the owners, but we would try and run it to a common renewal date in a year, 18 months' time.
Great. Okay. Well, look, I think that looks as if we've got through all of the questions. We've got someone who has lost out. Oh, that's sorted. But I think we have gone over our allotted time as usual, because you always give us such interesting questions, everybody, and we welcome them all, even if it does mean that we take longer than the hour that we promised we would be. But I would just really like to say thank you to both David and Chris. David from James Gibb Property Management, Chris Cadwallander from Deacon Property Insurance, and just to say thank you both so much for putting yourselves in the firing line for all of these questions about factoring and insurance that everyone finds to be hot questions all the time. Particularly these things come up on social media, so we do see them. Thank you both very much for giving up your time to take part in this. And thank you again, all of those of you who attended, who are still there, hanging in there, listening to us all. If you did happen to drift off, the recording will be there. And Suzanne saying that was terrific. Thank you all so much too. So there you go. I'm not the only one saying thank you, David and Chris.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Annie. Thanks.
Thank you both so much for being here.
And next week, it's my co-author, John Gilbert, on the topic of roofs. He has lots of pictures. He's so lucky in doing these presentations. So we'll look forward to seeing you all next week on the topic of roofs. Thank you so much. And
thanks, Annie.
everybody, goodbye.
Bye.